Okay. Well, we had some good discussion last week about, or at the end of chapter 2 in Mark, and we talked about another attitude of the Pharisees, particularly in verses 25 to 26 at the end of chapter 2. Maybe I can jog your memory, but what was Jesus calling out to them or with them? Yes, their inconsistency. How were they being inconsistent? Remember what they were condemning Jesus and His disciples about, but how were they being inconsistent? You remember Christ brought up what David did by eating the consecrated bread that was only supposed to be for the priests? Yet what are they doing with Jesus and His disciples? They were saying it was unlawful. But what did David do? Which was what? Unlawful. But what you don't see is them condemning David, but they are condemning Christ and His disciples. Inconsistent. All right? Because, and it's even more so inconsistent because Jesus and His disciples were doing something that was actually lawful. And they're condemning Him, but they don't condemn David. We've got to guard against that, being inconsistent. And so it goes with us today that, we need to be very careful with that. This inconsistency that we might show with others. And we need to make sure that we don't kind of have double standards for people. We're harsh on somebody for doing one thing, but we're not on somebody else when they might even do the same thing. And sometimes that's even with ourselves. We are harsh on somebody else, but we might do the same thing too. And sometimes that's very humbling when we finally come to that realization that I need to hold myself accountable. But we're inconsistent sometimes when we let somebody that we revere or like or uphold get away with something but condemn someone else, which is exactly what was going on in the text. And again, we had talked about this inconsistency with how we use the Scriptures even. Sometimes we misuse the Scriptures and we try and hold somebody accountable when really it may not be what the Scriptures are teaching at all. And then we talked about another thing that the Pharisees are doing at the start of chapter 3. When we read what they were doing on the Sabbath in the synagogue, what was that? But Jesus was about to, but what were they doing? They were watching. Why were they watching? Yeah, they were watching to accuse Him or bring legal charges against Him in case He was about to break one of their laws. Okay? And we talked about, or what we had talked about was that, given that this was on the Sabbath and in the synagogue, they're watching instead of worshiping. And so that's definitely something that we need to pay attention to. We need to make sure that we're not just watching people all the time in order to accuse them, especially other Christians, and certainly not when we come together to worship. We need to be focusing, not watching or watching to accuse. That's not what we're there to do. But really, it doesn't matter in terms of when we're worshiping. It really doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. Again, if we're just playing police, our minds aren't in the right place. What matters is what am I doing? All right? really the person down the pew shouldn't have any bearing on how I'm worshiping God. I at least need to make sure that I'm focused and I'm, doing what I need to be doing too.
Well, and that falls back to the point of the splinter.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for the splinter. They're not.
Absolutely. So there's an inconsistency there too. Okay, so in Mark chapter 3 now, we pick up in verse 3. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Get up and come forward." All right, so Jesus knows, He knows that they are watching Him, and He calls the man over anyway. And He said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save a life or to kill?" It says, but they kept silent. All right, so He asked them a tough question and kind of puts them in a bind. If they say it is lawful to do good, well, the people agree that, or would agree that healing this man's hand is something good. And however, their law would tell them that being good or not doesn't matter. It's whatever the law says. So they would have to say, no, the law says you can't do good on the Sabbath, because you would technically still be doing something or working. Which, that's not going to go over well with the people, because that doesn't make logical sense. What do you mean? You're not going to heal this guy? You're not going to help him? Would it be lawful to do harm on the Sabbath? Well, of course they would say you can't do harm. Is it lawful to save a life or to kill? They would say that it is lawful to save a life, because Yoma 8:6, you remember we looked at that in the Talmud, Yoma 8:6 tells us that if someone's life is in danger, you can save their life. But certainly not lawful to kill someone on the Sabbath, because that would be a violation of Sabbath law. This question that Jesus asks really puts them in a bind with the laws they've made up. It kind of backs them into a corner a bit. Because either way that they answer, their logic doesn't hold up. All right, now read verse 5, someone.
When He had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, He said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as it was.
After looking at them with anger. There are times in Jesus' ministry when He was angry. A righteous anger, I would add. He's angry at them because they have a hardened heart. They couldn't answer. They couldn't answer whether or not it's good to save a life, even on the Sabbath. They couldn't answer it. They've taken this stuff so far and have made up so many things that they're afraid even to answer Jesus' question, in fear that it would be going against their own law. And you can just read it and see their attitude about this stuff. And it's like, are you kidding me? Or are you serious? Do what? Yeah, they couldn't or they wouldn't. Might be a difference there. But we're talking about healing a man. Yet they're so bent on keeping their own law that they can't even answer whether or not it's lawful to do good or harm on the Sabbath. Shame on them. And so Jesus heals the man and his hand is restored. This is the second healing that He has done in front of the Pharisees, trying to prove a point to them. I think that one's on your outline. The second healing He's done, trying to prove a point to them. The first one was when He healed the paralytic, proving to them that He does have authority on earth to forgive sins. And with this one, He's proving to them that it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. With the paralytic, they were, if you go back and read it, it says they were reasoning in their hearts that Jesus was blaspheming. And here it says that they have a hardness of heart. It doesn't matter what good Jesus is doing, their heart is so hard, it won't allow them to see it. They couldn't see a paralytic being healed. They couldn't see the good in the paralytic being healed. They can't see that this man with a withered hand being healed is a good thing. The only thing that they see is the wrong that Jesus is doing according to what they have made up. We need to guard against a hardened heart. I believe it's possible that we can get to a point to where we stop seeing the good in things because we're so worried about what's being broken according to what we feel may be crossing the line. I think it's possible that we could stop seeing the good in things. When in reality, no harm is being done at all. But we've created a law sometimes that's not God's law in our own minds. And when somebody goes beyond that, that's all that we see. Does anybody feel that is true sometimes? Do what? Why? You say, why do we? I don't know.
I agree, I think we do. Jealousy is, I don't know.
Yeah. Why do I do that? I don't know. Maybe it's a zeal, maybe, to just make sure that we're trying to uphold God's law as best and as much as we can.
Well, and that's a good point, because that's exactly what Paul points out. If they were striving to be righteous,
Yeah, in Romans 10.
but it wasn't God's righteousness.
Yeah.
It was their own righteousness that they were trying to establish in themselves. And that's what Hosea talks about. My people are destroyed. You say, why? My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And a lot of that is just the lack of knowledge and ignorance we do these things.
Right.
A lot of times we do things because we're ignorant. Not a negative, but it's just a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
And why we do it. And that's why it's so important for us to learn the doctrines that are being
Yeah.
taught, so we can discern what's good and bad.
Absolutely. I think that's where it lies. Is maybe we just are a little bit ignorant on what is true and what's right and what God actually does say.
I agree we do it. I think we do it all the time. And I think those lines, I think we draw those lines because of what I said last week. I think we want things to be black and white.
Yeah.
And in our mind, this is where the line is between black and white. So I'm going to judge you based on the line in my mind.
Yeah, where your line is.
Black and white. And that's okay for me. If I want to assign that, man, this is what's safest for me, that's what. But I can't hold you to that standard if that's not a biblical standard. And I think we
Yeah.
tend to do that all the time. I have been very good at doing that.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think that's correct.
It's a love thing too. We don't understand that love. We don't.
Maybe we're less patient with people sometimes.
What Paul even said in some of his writings, he said, we got to be willing to yield. And that's not compromise.
Mhm.
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Because it's what Kevin talked about. Some things are subjective,
Yeah.
even in the Bible.
Yeah.
And it takes a while before you become understand. You can be wrong 2 years earlier, you grow.
Uh-huh.
But some things are objective that you can't compromise with Scripture.
Right.
But we got to be careful.
Yeah.
The things that are subjective, and sometimes, you may be right. You're just willing to yield.
Yeah. The other one may not be there yet. Yeah. Again, there's so much with. In fact, I think after this sermon I'm preaching today, I think I'm going to preach on just some attitudes that we've been talking about with the Pharisees. There's so much there that we see. But where was I? Yeah, so we don't see that. Sometimes we don't see the good that is actually coming from whatever it may be or something that someone is doing. We don't see the good. We just see, hey, you broke the law. A very black and white, to use your language, in our minds. You broke the law. And so that's another attitude of the Pharisees that we need to watch for and make sure we're not against a good thing, even if it might be a little bit different than how we see things. Okay? There are good things that a lot of people do. May not be the way that we think or the way that we would do them, but we still need to acknowledge at least that they are good things. And it's not stepping out of bounds. It's not stepping over or beyond God's law or something like that. Again, we need to know God's law, right? We need to have knowledge so that we're not, I guess you could say, maybe judging people in this kind of way. If I know what God actually says, then maybe that would prevent me from having those thoughts about someone. I think that's fair enough. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, if someone is breaking God's law, that's something else. But if somebody's doing something good and it's not breaking law or what He said or what He authorized, then we need to be okay with that. I wouldn't want Jesus to be grieved, to borrow that language, to be grieved at me because I have a hardened heart or because I'm upset about something that I should be rejoicing over. This man's hand is now healed. The paralytic can now walk. But they're just like, no, look what you've done. You're doing this. You're doing this. Well, I don't want to be that person either. I don't want to be one that Jesus would be grieved at because I simply just have a hardened heart and can't see the good in something. Right?
I think we hold people, especially maybe newer Christians, to a different standard.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Yeah.
and I'm guilty of myself, well, you're a Christian, you're not supposed to be doing whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
You gotta understand that's a process.
Yeah. That's a very, very good point.
Some of us have been Christians for a very long time. We're still messing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we give people maybe, I don't know if the right word is grace, but
Mm-hmm.
we gotta understand that
Yeah.
just like the kids, like you talked about giving them milk, giving meat, it's the same thing. We gotta remember that they don't know everything. We don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Just be patient with people.
Absolutely.
They're gonna mess up. They're gonna, look who Jesus hung out with. He didn't wait till everybody was,
Yeah. It.
so we have to, I think we gotta guard against that too, is like being patient, knowing that they're gonna fall down. With our kids, our grandkids, whatever, when they fall down, we do.
Yeah.
We get back up.
Maybe you've heard it before, but the kind of the saying that you can't expect non-Christians to act like Christians, right? And so, but sometimes we have that thought process in our minds. If we've been a Christian for some time, we sometimes look at other people and they're like, "Why are they doing that? What are you thinking? Don't do that. How could they do that?" But when you think about it, okay, your mindset and their mindset is completely different. You maybe have transformed your mind a little bit. You've been enlightened. You've graduated a little bit from the ways of the world and the worldly thinking. They're still in that. But I would also say exactly what you're saying. I think we need to make sure that we sometimes take that over to new Christians as well. They're still babes. I can't expect even, yes, a Christian, but even a new Christian to act like and have the same mindset as a 40-year Christian. I can't do that. I can't expect that. I've got to be okay sometimes with, they're going to mess up. They are going to fall. I need to realize sometimes I even fall. Okay, and we all do.
Even the ones on the top of the pedestal, say,
Yeah,
not that they put in this, but we look and say, how an elder is somebody that should be spiritually sound,
yes,
who has proven himself in the community, the church, all the characters that he needs. But see, he's gonna mess up too. And we gotta realize that even the young Christian can look at the older, wise Christian and go, wow, look,
Yeah.
they're waiting for him to mess up because he's up here.
yeah,
So we can go from both extremes.
yeah. And I
It's a hard issue.
to your extreme talk, I think maybe we could hello, good morning. We could let even sometimes that pendulum swing all the way out here. And it's like, well, they're just a new Christian, let's not worry about it. Well, they're just a new Christian, they're going to do that. It's going to happen. And now they're sinning even. But because they're a new Christian, maybe we let it slide or something like that. We don't need to get into that. This is why it's very important for Christians to help walk with new Christians. You have to help them. You can't just, you're a Christian, see you later. Have at it. Go be free. It doesn't work that way. The church, that's one of the responsibilities of the church. The church has got to help new Christians flourish. Yeah.
You know, I know that we like to choose the North MacArthur Horn a lot, but that is where we were converted. And those people were so patient with us. They gave us so much time to figure out some of the little details in our life and get things aligned, you know, with what Scripture said as we learned.
Yeah.
They didn't expect us to know everything right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And they were patient with us. And then whenever I would change something in my life and I would talk about it, and they were like, you know, I'm really glad you decided to do that. I was wondering.
Yeah. Because we were kind of
Come to that conclusion.
watching, we were kind of thinking, well, let's just give them some time on this. That's what it is. You've just got to give people some time. You've got to walk with them. You've got to work with them. You can't just say that, you can't just brush it off forever. Maybe things that new Christians might be doing. Because look, sometimes old ways and old habits, they don't just die off in one night. How many times do you have to do something and then it takes that many or more times to break that? You know what I mean? So,
Habits aren't created in one night either,
exactly.
so it takes the same to get rid of it.
Exactly. So,
The idea of not pushing people away, trying to make them perfect day one, because you're not even perfect yourself.
yeah. Yeah. Very delicate. Souls are delicate. People are delicate. They're precious. You don't want to push them away. It's a hard line, I think, to ride and walk with, pushing people away or helping them grow. Helping them grow. And that's what we want to aim to be as Christians and as a church. But
Well, if
anyway.
we don't, then we're doing the same thing they will.
mhm.
We're being very distant.
Yeah. We've got to help them see that there is a right way and there is a correct way and what's true and here's how you need to be.
So we're not gonna continue with you.
But we can't push it past that and just bring the hammer down sometimes, Good talks. All right. Verse 6 says, the Pharisees went out and immediately began conspiring with the Herodians against him as to how they might destroy him. All right, the point to all of this is in verse 6. Remember, he asked them the question, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill? Now, they would say, no, it's not lawful to harm on the Sabbath. Yet, look what they're doing now. Yeah, it's not lawful to harm on the Sabbath, but we don't have any problem going and conspiring with the Herodians on the Sabbath so that we can destroy you and put you to death in the future. We don't have any problem doing that, though. And so again, more inconsistency that we see from the Pharisees. Okay, but what we're seeing is that contrast between their law, their own made-up law, and God's law. They're enforcing their law, but their law has them backed into a corner. At the same time, they don't have a problem considering breaking their own law. Because they're like, all right, let's go talk to the Herodians and talk about how we can destroy this dude's life. The Herodians are Jews that the Romans have put in a political position to rule over the Jews. These are the Herodians. They are Jews, but they work for Rome. They're like tax collectors. Rome has put in place the Herods, all right, which was basically like a family dynasty of rulers, the Herods. You had Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa the first and the second. Each one of them were Herods. Okay. Now, normally, but Herod kind of became more of a title more than it did a name. Normally, they don't like, or Jews, they don't like the Herods. The Jews didn't like being under someone. However, in this instance, they have no problem going to the Herodians on the Sabbath to conspire and figure out a way to put an end to Jesus. So, when now the Herods can be a benefit to them, now they like them. Prior to that, we don't really like the Herods. We don't like being under somebody else. But boy, if you can help me kill Jesus, we'll partner up with you.
See, I was just looking at that definition. It says they're a wealthy class of Jews, which
Yeah.
with the Roman Empire, but you look at the procurators,
Mhm.
or the electors,
The governors, yeah.
these were also supporters of Rome, and who did they go to?
Yeah.
To get Jesus.
Yeah.
Using that Roman system.
Yeah. Kind of,
They were both using each other, the Jews and Rome.
yeah, kind of working together. I know we had talked about it a little bit, but seeing their inconsistency should remind us, and kind of very simple here, but it should remind us we need to be careful just to practice what we preach. I think that's kind of what we've been talking about. Be careful to practice what we preach. They were completely fine disregarding something that they normally upheld because they wanted Jesus gone. All right? And I think we could be faced with that sometimes. We may be fine or firm, I should say, in something that we do or don't do normally, but what if we see an advantage to be taken? Right? Like, what if we see that we can get ahead somehow? What if we see a way that we can get ahead and we are we going to break what we've always believed or taught and preached just because it may give us a leg up somehow? Need to watch that. But that's exactly what they're doing. Normally that wouldn't have been a thing. We're not conspiring with Herodians on a daily basis. Oh, but hey, we can put Jesus to death, maybe with their help. So let's just make sure that we practice what we preach. Someone read 7 and 8. Yeah, however you want to say that.
And from beyond the Jordan and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him.
All right. So he had gone out into Galilee and was preaching in Capernaum. And it's in Capernaum where those events happened with the Pharisees, and now a great multitude from Galilee followed, and also from Judea and Jerusalem, Idumea, maybe that's correct, people beyond the Jordan, people around Tyre and Sidon. So a great multitude and a great number of people are following him and are coming to him. So Jesus is probably now the biggest figure walking around Israel at this point. People by the thousands were following him now, following him around. All right, in verses, let's see. Okay, someone grab 9 through 12.
So he told the disciples that the small boat should be kept ready for him because of the multitude, lest they should crush him. For he healed many, so that as many as had afflictions pressed about him and touched him. And the unclean spirits, whenever they saw him, fell down before him and cried out, saying, You are the Son of God. But he sternly warned them that they should not make him known.
Okay. All right, so again, Mark highlights the crowds and the swelling of the crowds. In 145, it says he couldn't publicly enter into the city anymore, and he had to stay out in those unpopulated areas, or the wilderness. It was the same word for that. And in chapter 2, verse 2, all the people were gathered, and there wasn't any more room left, even in the house, not even near the door. And now, you have the whole region practically following him around. So, you see that the growth of the crowds that Mark continues to highlight. Okay, it gets bigger, it gets bigger, it gets bigger. More people are coming to him just to try and touch him. Can you imagine just following some man around just so that you could dive at him maybe when he walks by to graze his garment? And then boom, you're healed. People are going nuts over Jesus at this point. And now, when unclean spirits see him even, he doesn't even have to say anything to them. They're just falling down and proclaiming that he is the Son of God. They don't even put up a fight now. Doesn't even have to say a word. Remember, even the demons knew who Jesus was. All right? But with verse 12, we mentioned something very early on about this. What do you remember us talking about with verse 12? What do you think that is? He warned them not to tell who he was. Well, when Jesus tells somebody not to tell who he is, what do we say that is? Mystery or messianic secret?
Well, I know the time that Jesus was speaking to, because he was trying to teach, but he started speaking in parables for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Those who he spoke to would understand, those outside of that
Right.
spiritual meaning, they wouldn't understand.
Right.
And his time he wasn't ready to be glorified. They wasn't ready to understand. He would tell the apostles, you're not ready for this.
Yeah.
It's just not happening.
Yeah. That's true. But when he warns them, he earnestly warns them not to tell who he is. That's part of that messianic secret. Jesus still has a job to do. He's still going about. He doesn't want things to get too big too quickly just yet. He's working, okay? We talked about reasons for that, but if it gets too big, not that God's plans would be thwarted, but maybe it would hinder his work a little bit. But anyway, so verse 13 and 14 now, it says, He went up on the mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 so that they would be with him, and that he could send them out to preach and to have authority to cast out the demons. So Jesus is going to call a private meeting up on the mountain, and this is where he appoints his 12 apostles. It's not in Mark's gospel, but Luke tells us in his account, in Luke 6, 12 and 13, Jesus had been on the mountain praying all night, and then when day came, that's when he called them to the mountain to appoint them. So something to take from that is when we are faced with big decisions to make, going to God in prayer before we make those is a very healthy practice for us to do. Sometimes there is so much involved in big or tough decisions that we're faced with that we need to go to God and pray for guidance and wisdom in making that decision. whether it is a decision to move somewhere, whether it's a job that you have an opportunity to take, a decision that you have to make that's going to have an impact on other people or other than yourself, such as your family, or even if it's a hard conversation that you might need to have with somebody, or even the option to step into a new role in the congregation. Whatever it is, I'm throwing some things out there. But whatever the case, big decisions demand big prayer. Big decisions demand big prayer. Does that make sense? And we should seek God's counsel and His wisdom, and we ought to go to the one that is bigger than the decisions, than the big decisions we're faced to make. God is bigger than any decision you will ever be faced with to make. So why not go to Him for guidance and wisdom and help? Now, along those lines, sometimes it is more than just prayer. Sometimes it's more than just prayer. Sometimes what we need to understand is that seeking God's wisdom is more than just praying and waiting for an answer. Okay? Sometimes it takes digging into Scripture. What did God say for a situation like mine? You can read it. What did God say for a situation like mine? What did Jesus do? Or what example do we see from Paul with something like this? Or this apostle or this person, whoever it is. Seeking God's wisdom is found also in God's Word. We need to understand that too. It's not just prayer sometimes. It's not just prayer and wait. God, I want your wisdom. Where's His wisdom written? In His Word. All right, so now it also doesn't say for Jesus that it was one short prayer either. Jesus praying about this, His calling of the 12. Jesus prayed all night about this decision and who He was going to appoint to be His 12 apostles. In fact, it doesn't even say that He slept. It says that He prayed the whole night and then day came. That's a lot of prayer. I don't think I have ever spent an entire night, all night, awake, praying to God about something that was coming my way the next day. I don't think I have spent all night long praying in that kind of way. Never have I done that. That's what He did. It's a lot of prayer, but that's just another example that we can take from Jesus. That when it comes to big or tough decisions, prayer must be a factor for us in that. Communication with God needs to be a factor. Christians talk with God. That's what we do. We need to make sure that we have that. Okay? But we also see a little bit of why He chose them. The text kind of gives us three things here. So that they would be with Him, so that they could preach, so that they would have authority to cast out demons. All right? And then to wrap up, 16 through 19, basically it just gives us the 12 that are listed there. You can read those. Now, we don't read about the others being called. All Mark gives us is how Peter, Andrew, James, John, and Matthew were called. Now, we do know how Philip was brought into the mix, as well as Nathanael. We know that from John's Gospel. Nathanael was also believed to be Bartholomew, by the way. But the others, we don't really get any insight as to what interactions Jesus had with them. Maybe they were similar to the others, or the rest of them were diligent in their following, and maybe they were always there and Jesus saw something in them. But out of all of those probably thousands of people that were following Jesus around, who were called His disciples, these 12 guys were the ones that Jesus chose. These men must have been very special. I can't imagine what kind of character or conduct or whatever that they had that Jesus, the Son of God, God Himself said, "You 12." Thousands of people following Jesus around, and He picks these guys. Man, they must have been pretty upstanding young men. And they are the ones that are going to help take the gospel into the whole world. And we have so much to thank them for. Really, we do, for what they did. 20 says, He came home, the crowd gathered again to such an extent that they could not even eat a meal. More of the crowd that we see, it's back to having a hard time moving around. It got to be very difficult for Jesus to go about the daily routines of life even, and trying to do His work. He barely has any breathing room at all, is what we're seeing now. But we will stop at verse 20, obviously because of the bell, but I plan to stop at 20. We'll pick up in 21, because chapter 3, the end of it, demands a little bit more time. There are some maybe tricky things at the end there. Anyway, thank you for being here, and let's go worship.